The story of the foundation of the 2-2 Boys is highly unique from many of the other notorious street gangs in Chicago. The story begins in the mid-1970s in the Marshall Square neighborhood. Kids growing up around 23rd down the 22nd and California got together to play baseball and roller hockey on nearby Marshall Boulevard, which was 1 block away. This group of kids was about 13 years old in age for the most part, and many of them were family to each other. In the mid-1970s, the Latin Kings were trying to control all of Little Village as they became stronger in numbers. The notorious South Side headquarters for the Latin Kings was just a few blocks away at 24th and Marshall Boulevard. The Satan Disciples were trying to have their solidarity from 24th and Washtenaw, and both gangs were clashing at the border. Right at that border were these kids from 22nd to 23rd and California, so these kids would see the gang fights all the time between SDs and Latin Kings. One of the kids in the group, Lil Tita, later known as Animal, befriended Rusty, Chango, Joker Beto, and Little Vinny of the 24th and Washtenaw Satan Disciples. Soon the SDs were coming over to hang out with these kids all the time in front of Lil Tita's house at 2841 West 23rd Street. Latin Kings would come through the neighborhood and harass the kids from 23rd and California just because they were their own small crew. The kids were also being harassed on Marshall Boulevard, making it tough to play sports in the neighborhood anymore. Things got worse by 1976, as now Latin Kings even began shooting at Lil Tita's house, but these kids would not join the SDs. Instead, they decided to create their own gang to protect the area. They chose the name 2-2 Boys in 1976. After this creation, the 2-2 Boys established a strong alliance with the SDs at 24th and Washtenaw, 18th and Oakley and Taylor and Racine. In the late 1970s, the 2-2 Boys became more of a target than ever, now that they were an official gang. The Latin Kings marked them badly and continued to shoot and shoot and shoot at them, drilling several bullets in Lil Tita's home of all calibers. It didn't matter how many times Latin Kings pulled up shooting at the house, the 2-2 Boys kept battling ferociously against the Boulevard Latin Kings, hitting them back again and again, and viciously fighting them off in the streets of 22nd to 23rd and California. The 2-2 Boys were heavily outnumbered, and everyone in the neighborhood and the SDs were in awe about how this group could go against the Boulevard Kings so savagely. This even made the 23rd and California house at 2841 West 23rd Street legendary. In the year 1978, Malo, the cousin of Lil Tita, came to visit frequently to 23rd and California to check on the safety of his cousins. Malo was an Ambrose member and eventually started bringing Ambrose around there, and this created the tight alliance between 2-2 Boys and Ambrose. Ambrose and Satan Disciples were enemies, but now that both Ambrose and SDs were coming to hang out at 23rd and California with 2-2 Boys, the 2-2 Boys were able to draw up an alliance between the three clubs. 2-2 Boy founders were also family with 2-6, and now the alliance was extended to all 4 clubs, as many members of all 4 clubs were related. This led to Ambrose, 2-6 and Satan Disciples joining the Folk Nation Alliance in 1978. The 2-2 Boys were too new to be recognized to join the Folk Nation at that time, but were still protected by these folks. In that year of 1978, 2-6, Satan Disciples and 2-2 Boys created the Insane Alliance, which brought them closer together. Satan Disciples and 2-6 had dealings with Black Gangster Disciples, therefore, they were Insane Gangster. The 2-2 Boys did not have this deal with the BGDs. In the year 1980, as the SGD Coalition was first being drafted in Statesville Prison, the 2-2 Boys were officially taken into the Folk Alliance, as the SGD Coalition creation also opened the doors to more organizations to join Folk. By the year 1981, 2-2 Boys were Folk on the streets. In the year 1980, the 2-2 Boys ventured into new territory as they landed in the back of the yards community at 51st and Wood, near their allies the Satan Disciples. Here the 2-2 Boys were also tight with the Latin Souls from 49th and 50th Streets, as the 2-2 Boys mainly clashed with Saints, Bishops, and Latin Kings. This section lasted until I think 1992, when 2-2s went to war with Satan Disciples. As far back as January of the year 1980, 2-2 Boys began hanging out in the nearby suburb of Cicero. As 22 boys came into this community, they were not welcomed by the biggest neighborhood gang, the Noble Knights, so there was soon conflict. 22 boys would then come and retaliate against Noble Knights by shooting at them, but then Cicero police would blame Noble Knights for the shooting. The 22 boys made 19th and 48th Court their first Cicero territory in January of 1980. 22 boys at first recruited white youths in the neighborhood that were often referred to as hillbillies, mainly because Mexican families were just starting to move to that suburb that year, and the family of 22 boys was among the first Mexican families. Eventually, as Mexican families moved into the suburb in 1982, the 22 boys took the youths in as they were constantly bullied by white gangs like Noble Knights and 12th Street players. 22 boys got into a close relationship with 26 and Imperial gangsters in this community, as they were the only other established Folk Alliance gangs back then. The 22 boys also found an intense rivalry with the 12th Street players when they arrived in 1980. 22 boys also fought with the earliest Latin kings that were near 14th and 49th in 1980. 14th and 49th would become the second Cicero 22 section. 22 boys began making the local newspaper in 1981 in the Cicero area for getting into gang fights with Noble Knights that resulted in stabbings and shootings. Noble Knights complained about 22 boys as outsiders that moved in, and the Knights looked like justice warriors. Tragedy fell upon the 22 boys when 21-year-old Santos Limon was killed on December 28, 1981. Limon was a founder of the 22 boys and original member. Along with Lil Tita and Gil, Santos helped draw up the original concepts for the 22 boys as one of the main founders. He was dearly missed after being killed. Even if kids growing up in Grant Works were not in gangs, they were targeted and beaten up. By the summer of 1982, the youths in this area, both white and Mexican, had enough and were ready to join a gang. The 22 boys happened to be the most open to recruitment and began taking the frustrated youths into the 22 boys. With the new members, 14th Street and 49th Court became 22 territory as well. Noble Knights and Archdukes would invade 22 territory, smashing car windows and shouting as they came in with numbers as much as 40 members at a time, but now there was an actual full section of 22 boys to fight back. Rival gangs began invading 22 boy turf that now included Latin kings that were growing in Cicero. Rivals came in with guns blazing, shooting members of the 22 boys, but 22 boys began shooting back on 49th Court and caused invaders to stop coming onto 49th Court. As the fall of 1982 came and led into 1983, there was a war of one side of the Grant Works against the other, with the dividing point as 50th Avenue. Noble Knights and 22 boys were the main ones in conflict, and Noble Knights considered just about anyone from the 22 side of Grant Works to be enemies, and this fueled 22 boy recruitment into 1983 as the organization swelled to over 100 members. Now the 22 boys opened at 14th and 48th Court, 19th and 48th Avenue, and 31st and Laramie in 1983. The 22 boys spread their influence deeper in Cicero in the later 1980s and opened sections such as 24th and Central, 35th and Austin, 16th and 47th Court Murdertown, and Ogden Avenue to 33rd and 51st Avenue to Central Avenue Raytown. The 22 boys also needed to deal with the fact that Noble Knights, Archdukes, and 12th Street players liked to play into the community and act like pillars of the community by going to businesses and cleaning up 22 boy graffiti. They put on an image that they cared for the community and demonized the 22 boys, so now the 22 boys had to deal with more police attention and residents hating them. It was tough, but the 22 boys still managed to dominate a lot of Cicero. They colonized and recruited hundreds of members in Cicero. The 22 boys' closest ally has always been Ambrose. Both organizations even wear the same gang colors, and wearing these colors and hanging out together in each other's neighborhoods is what dragged both gangs into their first inter-alliance gang war with a fellow Folk Nation gang. On November 7, 1986, 22 boys from Cicero were invited to a party that was being thrown by Ambrose at 63rd and Rockwell in the Marquette Park neighborhood. When the 22 boys arrived at the party, they were informed of another Ambrose party being held at 6318 South Washtenaw, so they decided to check that party out. Along the way back to Cicero to get more of their friends, they stopped and got cigarettes at a 7-Eleven, where they witnessed 226 gang members Jason Gray and Manuel Bobe, also known as Little Hulk, beating up two guys in the parking lot. The 22 boys then later were driving down Kedzie and were approaching the I-55 expressway exit when that same 26 car pulled up alongside them and were flashing 26 gang signs, throwing bottles at the car. Bobe and Gray and a third 26 in the car thought the 22 boys were Ambrose gang members, but even when Jesse Alvarez and Sam Rotter flashed 22 boy gang signs, the 26 gang members did not stop with the hostility according to court documents. Then the 22 boys pulled onto the expressway and proceeded to pick up their two friends from Cicero. On the way back to the party, once the 22 boys got off I-55 at the California Avenue exit, that same 26 car whipped out in front of them, and Bobe and Gray got out flashing 26 signs and challenging them to a fight. The 22 boys got out of the car to fight, but the 26 got back in the car and drove away. Later that night, as the Cicero 22 boys were partying with Ambrose at the 63rd and Washtenaw party, there was a knock at the door at about 12:30 a.m. When the door was answered, Jason Gray started shooting at the party guests. Then Manuel Bobe started shooting according to court documents. 4 people were shot and 3 of the 4 were killed. One of those killed was a 22 boy gang member, and the one that was injured that was not killed was a 22 boy named Jose Mendez, according to court documents. After this 1986 shooting, 22 boys and Ambrose went to full-scale war with 26, despite the fact that they were all part of the folk nation. Lil Tita moved out of 23rd and California in 1987, but she left a major legacy as the first and only female founder of one of Chicago's most notorious street gangs. Yayo, Gil, and Benny Bear later became family men and retired from the gang life in later years, but continued to run the 22 boys well into the 1990s. The legend of these founders is something to be marveled, especially the legacy of Lil Tita, later known as Animal, as being the only known female founder of a Chicago street gang. In the 1970s and 1980s, she was the most protected female in Little Village. Later into the 1980s and early 1990s, the 22 boys began colonizing in more suburbs than Cicero as they arrived in suburbs like Countryside, Lyons, and Brookfield. The 31st and Laramie 22 boys from Cicero opened up a faction in the suburb of Bolingbrook that was ran by Poppy and Superman. Ambrose went to war with Satan disciples, and this naturally brought the 22 boys into war with SDs as well. 22 boys were much closer with Ambrose and had a deeper brotherhood, while the relationship with SDs was more businesslike. SDs were looking to expand their turf throughout the Marshall Square area, and Cermak and California was right in the crosshairs of SD expansion. SDs perhaps wanted 22 boys to flip to SDs, but 22 boys held their territory sacred and refused to give in to SD expansion. This sparked a war with the SDs, ending the 22 boys alliance with the Insane family. However, the 22 boys kept the Insane part of their name, which angered SDs further. The 22 boys and Ambrose would also engage in a very vicious inter-alliance war with the gang La Raza that used to be fellow Allied folks, for the reason that La Raza was heavily infringing on the 14th and 49th Avenue territory in Cicero. Things became more of a headache when the Majestic Party crew that shared 31st and Laramie with the 22 boys joined the folk nation under the umbrella of the Satan disciples, instead of under the umbrella of the 22 boys in 1992. The 22 boys felt this was disrespect because the two gangs hung out all the time drinking and smoking together and fighting the Kings. Now the Majestics joined forces with the SDs. This of course meant war between 22s and Majestics right on each gang's own front lawns, and it turned out to be a nasty and costly war that neither side could win. All the gang wars going on caused some 22 boys to flip to maniac Latin disciples, and eventually a set of Cicero MLDs popped up. The MLDs saw opportunity with the 22s and Majestics slugging it out and killing each other. So the MLDs made a move to take 31st and Laramie, and this caused the 22 boys to go to war with MLDs as well. More problems came in 1993 when the Milwaukee Kings settled in the Grant Works section of Cicero, and right away they wanted turf near where 22 boys were. And this turned the 22 boys up to start gunning at MKs as well, especially after the MKs killed a 22 boy. It was also in the same year that the war with 2-6 now became more focused and more intense, as 2-2s and 2-6 were fighting for control of the Parkholme homes. Not only were the 2-6 fighting the 2-2s over at Parkholme, but 2-6 was also fighting the Latin Angels, who were also dealing with a war with the Latin Kings as well. 2-2 boys and Latin Angels were really tight with each other because of their common enemies. They even banged together against the Sin City boys after they moved into Cicero. The Latin Angels were really the only ally the 2-2 boys had by 1993, but that would all change when the Latin Angels surprisingly joined the People Nation and allied with the Latin Kings even after they killed Edward Lalo Jacques outside of the pool. Now the 2-2 boys had no allies in Cicero except the Harrison Gents, who did not have a very strong presence in Cicero. Eventually the 2-2s would have on and off truces with MLDs and Insane Majestics. In 1994, the 2-2 boys shook hands with their longtime rivals of almost 25 years, the Culleton Deuces. The Culleton Deuces decided to switch from the People Nation Alliance to the Folk Nation Alliance, and that is what brought them together, along with hate for nearby SDs and Latin Kings. In 1997, the Maniac Latin disciples swelled in numbers in the area all around 31st and Laramie and waged war once again with the 2-2 boys and the Insane Majestics. The Majestics and 2-2 boys were all banged up from battling each other, and this would cause both gangs to dissolve at the hands of the MLDs at 31st and Laramie if something drastic was not to be done. Therefore, the Trey 1-2-2 boys and Majestics called a truce and teamed up against the MLDs. After a while, the three gangs called a truce, and in the agreement the 2-2 boys left the area to the MLDs peacefully, especially since 2-2 boys needed their forces more built up in other parts of Cicero. This move was smart on the 2-2 boys' part because they could have survived there, but only until more members ended up in prison for violent crime. Then young members would have flipped. Sometimes it is best to pull out of an area if it is more costly than profitable. The Majestics stayed at that corner because that is their only turf anywhere. In the same year of 1997, or perhaps a year prior, in 1996, the short-lived alliance with the Culleton Deuces came to a halt as both gangs went at it again. However, over time this war would be on and off. The 2-2 boys have always been able to survive with little to no allies. They can also be surrounded by multiple enemies. They would fight multiple intense and brutal gang wars all at once. Most gangs have an ally or two around them or only battle one rival in their direct vicinity, but the 2-2 boys have been known to throw down with several gangs all at once. Cermak in California is still heavily protected and is a zone where rivals will be met violently if they attempt to take over. The 2-2 boys have remained in between two major opposing turfs of the Satan Disciples and Latin Kings, with Culleton Deuces just north of them too. Many rivals end up coming through 2-2 neighborhood on their way to spill blood of other rivals, yet 2-2s remain on this warpath they call home.